Welcome everybody here to our this year's European History Forum at the Heinrich-Böll Foundation. Welcome to everyone. I'm just standing here because the cameras are also in this direction so that everyone can see me. So I hope you don't mind. I'm just looking into one side now. My name is Phillip Albrecht. I'm one of the two co-presidents of the Heinrich-Böll Foundation, and I really would like to welcome you all. And so good to see you all here back at the European History Forum, which now we hold for the 13th time. Since its inception in 2011, the European History Forum has been a central project of our European and South European department, and it was developed in close cooperation with Memorial. For the past 2 years, the Contemporary History Department has also contributed to its conception and organization. From its inception, the forum has provided a space for exploring European history and the culture of remembrance, particularly by incorporating perspectives from Central and Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe and Southeastern Europe, of course, too. The aim is to bring these diverse perspectives into dialogue and thus contribute to the vision of an integrated Europe, not only economically, but also with regard to collective narratives and historical self-perceptions. The forum promotes encounters and exchanges between historians, history educators, museum staff, and other actors in the culture of remembrance from Central Eastern, Southeastern, and Eastern Europe, as well as from Germany. This year's forum will take place today and tomorrow, and it is entitled, as you see, 1945 to 2025, 80 years of narratives about the end of World War II. The focus will be on two thematic areas. First, the changes in official and societal discourse about the year 1945, particularly against the backdrop of the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. Second, the forum will examine the political projects of resistance groups against the Axis powers and the legal and societal processing of Nazi crimes after the end of the war. The debate about the end of the Second World War is more relevant today than ever, and not just on the occasion of the 80th anniversary. The commemoration day falls in the third year of the brutal Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. It makes clear Europe is once again at war. And we are once again experiencing extreme violence in many of the regions that were already scenes of massive destruction and crimes during the Second World War. At the same time, the societal consensus on remembering the Second World War is increasingly faltering. Since the 1980s, the focus of this consensus has been the recognition of the victims of the Nazi policy of persecution and extermination, especially European Jews and the Sinti and Roma. At the same time, awareness of the diversity of victim groups, for example, the persecution of homosexuals or the exploitation of Eastern European forced laborers, has grown. This is precisely why it is particularly relevant today to examine the meaning and current reinterpretation of the memory of the Second World War, because this memory is continually being renegotiated, both within German society and at the European level. This brings us full circle to the first European History Forum in 2011. That year marked the anniversary of the German attacks on the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia. And the forum was titled Shared Memories. Even then, it was clear the history of the Second World War is central, yet deeply contested, a central perspective for looking at the present, legitimizing political orders and shaping social self-perceptions. The end of the Second World War, therefore, does not mark an hour zero for German and European society. This is not only because the strong continuities, particularly with regard to the right-wing extremist mindset networks and perpetrator biographies, into post-war German society. The war continues to have an impact in political cultures, in memories, in the violent influences of entire regions, and not least in the societal conflicts we are waging today. Recognizing and naming this is central to a critical and responsive culture of remembrance, to which this forum is committed. I thank you all for your active participation and look forward to 2 days of full, exciting and intensive debate. My sincere thanks go to my colleagues from the Eastern and Southeastern Department and, of course, the Contemporary History Department and our conference office and all the staff who make this event possible today and tomorrow. I wish you all a successful 13th European History Forum. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Jan, and again, a very warm welcome also from my side. I'm Walter Kaufmann, heading the Department for Eastern and Southeastern Europe, and together with my colleagues Nina Happe and Jana Falkenroth, we have been the responsible team here in Berlin, and Klara Fristratska from our History Department. We have prepared this meeting, but also to mention our colleagues in the offices in the region in Eastern and Southeastern Europe. Most of them are here, and it's always a very great gathering of partners, friends, and colleagues of the Böll Foundation. 40 years ago, on the 8th of May 1985, the then Federal President of Germany, Richard von Weizsäcker, gave an important and very moving speech in the German Bundestag. I personally remember it well, partly because I received it as a small book from my aunt a short time later when I was just finishing school. With this speech, Weizsäcker set important landmarks for the German culture of remembrance, which in some ways have remained valid for decades. Just to mention a few of the core elements. Weizsäcker said that the 8th of May should be remembered by the Germans despite all the individual and very different experiences of suffering. It should be remembered first of all as a day of liberation from the system of Nazi tyranny. All suffering, he said, all misery, all violence, the division of Germany and Europe do not stem from the end of the war, but from the beginning of Nazi tyranny in January 1933. The principle, the valid principle, is not one of collective guilt, but of collective responsibility, knowing what states and people are capable of. And last but not least, remembering is a prerequisite for reconciliation. By remembering its dark past, Germany should and will send a message of peace to East and West. Heinrich-Böll, the writer, Nobel Prize winner, and namesake of our foundation, and we will learn about him personally and his war and post-war experiences tonight. He took this speech very seriously and recommended it to include it into every school book. In a fictional letter to my sons after the Second World War, the writer explained, "You will always be able to recognize the Germans by whether they refer to 8th of May as the day of defeat or the day of liberation." Today, 40 years later, we once again have a lot to learn, to reconsider. First, despite the end of National Socialist violence and occupation, how little, if to be honest, how little reference to their own reality the talk of Liberation Day had for many people in Central and Eastern Europe in the first post-war years and still has today. Second, how much Weizsäcker's speech was aimed at a fairly homogeneous German society in which many contemporary witnesses were still alive, and memories were passed on in families or made taboo. Whereas today, we are a heterogeneous society without contemporary witnesses, and with many, many fellow citizens were with completely different backgrounds. They have grown up in societies, in different societies and histories, like in Turkey, Iraq, Ukraine, Poland, etc. And above all, what we then felt like a guarantee of peace, this never again in Europe in '85, that our vigilant learning from the history of violence in the first half of the century will kind of automatically have the consequence of peace and peace messages. This peace idea or message has been in a way used up, has at least become fragile, or even worse, has turned out to be a deception. Every day we witness Russia's brutal war of aggression against Ukraine and the way how Putin has captured war memory for war propaganda. And he successfully also uses our decade-long ignorance towards Ukraine and other East European societies and states that were part of the former Soviet Union. So what makes this anniversary so different this time? And what tasks should we historians and those active in remembrance politics in Eastern, Southeastern, and Western Europe set ourselves? This is the topic of our introduction talk here, and I'm very glad to welcome to my left Professor Claudia Weber. Claudia Weber is the chairholder of the Faculty of European Contemporary History at the Europe University Viadrina in Frankfurt. Oder she has a strong focus on history of violence and dictatorships in the 20th century, on cultural history of the Cold War, and on history of war in the modern area. Welcome, Mrs. Weber. Glad that you're here. And I'm very glad that Professor Jaroslav Hrytsak made it here to Berlin from Lviv. I just reminded him that we met for the first time in '92 at a World Congress of Ukrainianists in Lviv. So for me, it's a particular pleasure and honor that he made it to our history forum, I think, for the second time. Many years ago, you have been at one of the history forums. Jaroslav Hrytsak is he is the chair of and professor of contemporary history of the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv. Among many other functions, he is the chief editor of the scholarly journal Ukrainian Modern, member of and founder, as I know, of the German Ukrainian Historical Commission of Historians, member of different academic journals, and member of the supervisory board of the Harvard Ukrainian Studies. I have left out a lot of different other roles, but Jaroslav, it's great that you're here. And I would like to start with you, Jaroslav, looking at the commemorations this year. We have seen what happened in Moscow. There was very little in the news about what happened in Ukraine in regard to the anniversary. What was the way to commemorate? Was there any commemoration of this anniversary? And what was different if you compare it to 5 years ago?
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here again. And thank you for support that you're providing for us, for Ukrainian scholars, and for the Ukrainian community at large. There has been no news because there was nothing with taking part, particularly in Ukraine, in Kyiv, on the 8th or 9th of the 8th of May. There was something very particular on the May 9th, but there's a different story not related to the war. So to say, first of all, Ukraine has a now different memory of the war, and this is different war, nowadays war. I cannot show you the video which I made, but this is something we talk about everyday experience, every day, every single day. On 9 a.m. strict, there is a minute of silence and memory. And this is very moving because everyone stop on the streets and stay for a minute. Every car starts on the street, people moving out the car at a special moment. And you could see in every city in Ukraine, whether it's Lviv, like my native city in the west, or in Kharkiv. This is something that gives the idea that we have to understand that our memory is predominated by the other war. This war is fading away. This is something that is very, very important to say. Also because the meaning and significance of the May 8 or May 9 has changed dramatically. Before the Maidan, this was probably one of the most important holidays in Ukraine, judging by the surveys. Eastern Christmas, New Year, and Day of Victory. This is the four which is always on the top. Not anymore. So they started to decline since the Maidan, and nowadays there's a tiny fragment of Ukrainian society that still see this as a very important event. It's like a decreased 5 or 6 times, so to say. So this is something very important. It's not featuring in Ukrainian historical memory as something which is that much important. Not because Ukrainians think it's not important, because overshadowed by some other recent memories. Also very important, the date has been moved. Because originally Soviet date was the May 9th. Nowadays it's May 8th. To join the European space. So we now live in different calendars. Actually, basically, it's very important that we live in different calendars, that both Day of Victory and Christmas Day, we have a different calendars, so to say. We are more with the European than with the former Russian Soviet space. So we're a little different in different historical periods, so to say, different historical times. Then again, it's not celebrated as a victory, because the concept you could not celebrate the war. This is the basic concept. You couldn't celebrate the war, and especially because Ukraine has a trauma of the war, very deep trauma of the war. Let me just give you very brief data, which nobody has been contested, but this is still like probably more or less they're trustful. So starting from 1914 until the 1945, 30 years of this exceeding violence in Ukraine, every second male and every fourth female died of a violent death, which is very much like a 17th century war of 30 years over the 17th century. So this is, you have to say, therefore, I mean, it's a very different experience from Russia and Ukraine, because Russia participated in the war, has contributed to victory without a doubt, but doesn't have this kind of the sufferings and this violence that Ukrainians underwent, including Holodomor, famine, which is another central part. If Ukrainians are referring to something, they must refer as a Holodomor, as a center of this violence, rather than to the Second World War. So this is something which gives you the idea how Ukraine has been changed. And this is the war. This is the war, the recent war, because the war is game changer. That said, I just wanted to go to the wider context, geopolitics, if I may say so. I suggest that we should take seriously the statement by Olaf Scholz that this was a Zeitenwende. This is the Zeitenwende, in many senses. Many historians see this as a really kind of the break turning point in the global European history. In you name history, name it. Timothy Garton-Ash used to say this is what happened in 1922. It's the end of the post-war period. We have a post-war, then we have a post-war, and now we have a post-war period, which is marked by the exceeding violence, conflicts, and probably decade of the war, which provide very different context. What's matter here? You should look that closer, not that much to Kyiv, but to Moscow, because the major change occurred in Moscow. If you look closely what happened this year, for the first time, the commemoration or the celebration of the victory, still celebration victory, was joined by the leaders of Brazil and China. You could still discuss whether China is related to the Second World War, but Brazil, probably providing shelter for Nazis in this sense, not in this sense, but still one matter here, because we have a quite different configuration. Before that, it was the people of the Soviet Union who were fighting against Nazi. Nowadays, it's a BRICS. Now it's a rest against the West. It's a quite different configuration for the first time. Importantly, more so because of the Trump. Trump is left out of the rest of the West. Now West considered as a kind of ally, the American United States, a kind of ally, and the main center of now of fascism is Europe. They call specific term Euro-fascism. There was a caricature which has the Hakenkreuz with Ursula von der Leyen presented as a leader of this. So this is something which tells you about the quite different symbolic meaning of the war. So in a sense, not just Putin monopolized victory of the Second World War, he changed the context. He basically claimed this is the part of the century ongoing fight versus corrupt, liberal, Nazi-producing West. And he sees himself as a leader of the rest who is fighting against this West. And he sees Ukraine as a part of the West. Not that much Ukraine per se, because he believes he doesn't fight Ukraine. He fights NATO on Ukrainian ground. So which I mean is to say, about two different interpretations. Because in Russia, in Moscow, due to Putin's propaganda, it's a central element. Nowadays, like a secular religion. It's, they say, это все наше, which is hard to translate. This is our central aim, which is very much marginal in Ukraine. So what I'm saying is there's a very much two time zones, two different meaning, all the kind of thing, because basic of what we have here, and this is why post-war is that important and judging this sign, because before that period we have two moral zones. We have a zone of European Union, which was basically unprecedented event, phenomenon, because this was for the first time in the world history, global history, we have a region where no war between the neighbors could be fastened. So no war area and very large one, so to say. And there was a hope very much also based on Ukrainians that we could extend this war farther to the east, including Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, and so on. Now with post-war, we have a different tendency. We have like the zone of the war moving into zone of the reconciliation. So basically the thing is, and this I'm stopping here, because basically it's not just about the meaning, symbols, it's also about two different strategies, how we deal with the history and with the past. Because for Putin, and also for many populists, including Trump, the main symbolism or main message, there has been golden age sometime, and have to revive it. Let's make America great again. Let's raise Russia from knees, all the kind of things. So there's a whole perception that we have to return to past, and we можем повторить. We could repeat, so to say. Luckily enough, Ukraine has no golden age. Ukraine have nowhere to return, so to say. So basically, our golden age is a future. So this is kind of two different strategies how to deal with the past. It's a kind of the deepen the past and overcome the past, so to say. And this have been taken in this construction. But I'll stop here.
Thank you so much. May I add one more question? You said, referring to this time difference, or the difference between May of 8th and 9th, that Ukraine is joining the European space in regard to commemoration and historical discourse. I think we've been separate for many decades, and Ukraine has felt isolated in many ways for decades. Yeah? And you've been part of many German-Ukrainian discussions, but also European discussions. As we are just talking here about the European culture of remembrance, where do you see it today from an Ukrainian point of view?
Frankly, I don't know. Because it's not our major concern, so to say. Yeah, I could tell you in details what's going on, but it'd be very boring. We do some kind of efforts. We try to combine Ukrainian and global history in the textbooks. We have the kind of program of other things. But let me tell you, it's not a basic concern, because what we might expect for Europe is an issue of security. It's on the top. And nowadays, the crucial issue, whether European Union could be a union of security. Not just the high standards of life, not just kind of the liberal regime, all the kind of things, but security first. And therefore, this is what I failed to mention. What was really important in Ukraine in May 9th, that Starmer, Merz, Macron, and Tusk visited Ukraine on the May 9th to join commemoration in Kyiv, but it was not the memory of the war. It was memory of the Schuman project. So nowadays, May of the 9th considered to be Day of Europe. So that said, I could provide you with the data. Now Ukrainians, most Ukrainians feel themselves as a very legitimate part of European space, also in historical terms, other things. But then again, how Europe could respond and what Europe could really provide to secure this kind of the narrative. Because we could build a beautiful narrative, but it's not substantiated by the practices. This might be a huge gap. So I would say probably more important to have this kind of discussion a year or two after we'll see the result of this effort, this kind of coalition of willing. And it's very important again, sorry I'm talking too much, that this was realization, implementation called Weimar Triangle. This is 1991 idea, like post-war. Nowadays, it's very important because geopolitics they're very tricky. Nowadays, the Weimar Triangle has been extended by whom? By Great Britain, who is outside of European Union. So we don't know what will be the future configuration, but we believe that European will be part of this configuration. And we believe also, again, this might be our illusion, but this we believe that in such a circumstances, Ukraine is not quite a problem, but might be a solution to this kind of new union of security. Because given the size of the Ukrainian army, whatever you say about Ukrainian army, and the Zasmat critics is now the best army and largest army in Europe, which has the biggest and the most the experience of the waging a new technology war, so to say. So this is basically what we see. We may expect change of the, how should I say, perspective, what Europe is. Not just Europe with high standards of living, not just a democracy, but also Europe that could provide security and also be a stabilizing factor in the continent and the global world, more so after Trump is trying to destroy this system. So this is a new challenge. We don't know how to respond, but again, it's probably too early to say. We are living in this period, but the configuration is quite different.
Well, thank you. Claudia Weber, listening, Jaroslav, given the context, it sounds to me like, well, not forget about history yet, but forget about commemoration. It's not important. It's everything about now and today and tomorrow. You have observed and you have participated, I know, in a lot of conferences, meetings, projects commemorating or around this anniversary. How have you observed this commemoration in Germany? What is different? And is there a sense of urgency in a way that Jaroslav is expressing?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And first of all, thank you for having me here. It's a great pleasure, and also to listen to you and to talk to you. I guess these are two questions about the urgency. So we have a current political urgency that's different from commemorating and from history. Although, of course, history is always the present, and we always read history through our present times. So therefore, interpretations always change. So just let me pick up on what Jaroslav said about not celebrating war. So I think one important aspect of this year's commemorations and anniversary was, as I observed it, that we all remember now, and that's different from earlier times, what war means, the everyday experience, and not only in the Ukraine, I guess. So I'm living in Brandenburg, so where the war is, it's very close. So, and our perception of war and the history of war has changed in so far as we now very much, now with this war in Europe, feel how close we are on a very horrible event and what in fact war means to each and every one of us. And it means death, and it means horror, and it means violence. I guess this year's anniversary is a good opportunity to remember the horror of war and what war means. So nobody can ask for war and wish war. So, and I think we had this official celebration or Remembrance Day in the German Bundestag, but then I guess we had a lot of very local initiatives, smaller workshops, smaller conferences, where we, of course, against the background of our present, talked about the reality of war and the violence. And I very much like those local initiatives. So remembering what war means, talking to the last eyewitnesses, seeing what happened in Brandenburg, for instance, in the spring of '45. So this is one aspect, I guess. And then the second is, this is more from an academic or scientific point of view, I would underline that this anniversary is special because now we are in a war situation in Europe. But then it's because of this reality, it changes our interpretations, and it also changes our culture of remembrance or memory culture. So it makes us more alerted, I would say. During the past years, I guess our culture of memory has become a bit of stereotypical. So we knew what to expect on the anniversaries. We knew how to deal with our culture of remembrance. But now we are confronted by a totally different situation. So how to deal with Russia now? How to deal with the history of the Soviet Union? How to deal with the participation of the Ukraine in the Second World War, and what happened to the Ukrainian population, for instance, in Poland after the Second World War. So there are a lot of new points to remember. These are historical events, of course, but now we remember them in a very different way. They're just coming to the surface, and we have to deal with them. And I like this a lot, I have to admit, so that we are now discussing a new culture of memory, also in regard of the disappearance of the eyewitnesses, of course. So this is a fact we all have to face. This is a natural development. So, but how our memory culture will look like from now on is a very interesting question. Also in regard of the use, and everybody knows this, on social media. So, but the second point is the changes in historiography. And I think that this year's anniversary and all what happened in the Ukraine and in Europe in general now confronts us or gives us the opportunity to scrutinize our historiography and to develop new perspectives. And I, of course, as a historian, I thought about what's new about history, how can I develop new questions? And just to mention one, I'm very fascinated at the moment by looking at the mutual influence between pre-war conceptions, the course of the war, and post-war. So our post-war, or the history after '45, is has already been influenced by post-war concepts during the 30s and the course of the war, the Second World War. And we see this now in the Ukraine, for instance. We already discussing post-war plans for the Ukraine. We did this already 3 years ago. And of course, the post-war concepts influenced the course of the war. So I guess this is a really new academic question I would really like to research. So I leave it here.
I come back to the political challenges for historians. History, commemoration always has been very political, and we look at the past from the present. This is kind of logical. But if you look into different countries that are represented here by participants, just from last week, I heard that in Mariupol there was a monument erected and opened for Stalin in occupied Mariupol. I read news from Armenia. A high-ranking former official of the Ministry of Defense said that for Armenia the victory was kind of bad. A Nazi victory or German victory might have been better for Armenia because a kind of independent, bigger Armenia could have been realized. Yeah? So things come up, or very old things like the Stalinism come back. And the commemoration and the history of the Second World War is being politicized in an unprecedented manner, you may say, through social media and through how can we face these challenges? How can we confront them by asking new questions, or also so what kind of task do we set ourselves in order to confront all this kind of propaganda? It's maybe easy in Germany, much more difficult in Western Balkans or in many of these societies where politicians themselves directly use very different stories for their sake.
Okay, this is a difficult question, but I think maybe I can answer it best in one way. Don't be afraid. I guess this is my recommendation. Don't be afraid in addressing the difficult complexity of war history. And don't be afraid of asking questions that feel uncomfortable, and having enough self-esteem to commemorate the complexity of the war. So I guess that's the best way to address propaganda, because propaganda, and now we see this re-emergence of a pro-Stalin glorification in the Soviet Union, in Russia. And so, and yeah, that's very comfortable. I mean, Putin, I mean, I can understand that he uses Stalin. It's very easy. It's comfortable for him. I mean, why should he address problems? So why should he address contradictions? He's going the easy way. And and we shouldn't do this, I guess. We should very openly address contradictions, the contradictions of, again, what we did in the 90s, the contradictions of collaborations, the contradictions of a war history that has no heroes. I mean, when Putin is uses the glorification of the Second World War and war heroes, then why don't let our answer be there are no heroes? A very small number. In a war, in the reality of war, people are heroes in the morning and perpetrators in the afternoon. That's what war is. So, sometimes I would very much like to be ourselves more self-esteemed, more on solid ground, more not being afraid of being so reluctant about now and addressing the fact that the Soviet Union was on the winner side in the Second World War. Okay, yeah. I mean, who would doubt this? And it's better, I guess, to deal with this in a very sovereign and a very self-esteem way, instead of being afraid and looking at how are we going to address this. So this is just playing into Putin's hand. And he is just joking about the West.
Do you agree?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. First of all, I would have to say that history, particularly historical memory, it's a very toxic stuff. Extremely toxic stuff. I have a friend of mine, you probably know David Reef, American author. By the way, he's a son of Susan Sontag. And he wrote a very telling book, and a book of very telling name, In the Praise of Forgetting. Throughout the last 30 years, he visited every possible area of the war conflict. Bosnia, Rwanda, now he's in Ukraine. And he basically says, if you want to see when war is coming, just look what they're talking about history. Once the identify talks about history, it's a sign that war may come, so to say, because it's a very toxic stuff. It's very, very used to legitimize the war. It's basically what Putin did. Because basically, if you look at his argument, it's most of the arguments of the historical character. So this is exactly the case. So I say, if I may have some kind of the upper hand in the European Union, I will forbid strictly to use history for political aims. I know it's a utopia, but still, this is a message. If somebody uses history for political aims, that's dangerous. That's have to put a red line, so to say, and this is something for me very, very important. That said, I applaud what just Claudia said, but I have a small point of so to say, difference here, which means there are heroes, without a doubt. What I'm saying, put this step back. What was a surprise, or long ago, before even Maidan, I was in Kazan, this Russian city capital of Tatarstan. There was a very good group of the young Russian historians who edited Abim Peri, probably know this journal. It's a very important journal. Now they moved to United States because they was considered as agent of the cult. You know this kind of rhetoric in foreign languages and strani agente. So basically, I was just in the hotel and I watched TV, and a part of the Game of the Thrones, everything was on the Second World War. And the main message, it was not just this was so say amazing to say, but the way war was presented as a very beautiful stuff, as a war place for heroes. And this is the most toxic issues after that. I agree, heroes are extremely dangerous. When you have history that is dangerous, it's extremely dangerous, so to say, because this is exactly the celebrating the war. We could repeat it because it was good. It was good because we had a lot of heroes, and our country was a main epitome of the hero. And this is exactly the most toxic stuff. That said, I believe that one of the major shift would be shift from heroes to victims, because there is a general rule, which is known for a long, long time, that hero, they disunite, while victims, they have more unifying effects when it's thought about victims, because there's something human in that, so to say. So what I'm saying here, this must be a shift from the heroes to victims, because quite often, let's face it, our heroes are quite often has been bandits. There's a very thin line between heroes and bandits in most of the countries of this space, probably in Germany as well. I don't know this for German history. The thing is, but that said, I believe there is particular kind of heroes we just to celebrate. And these are heroes who saved victims, who saved life of the victim. This is the most important shift, I believe, because every country, every hero has this kind of hero, which really was risking their life, celebrating this kind of potential victim. And this is exactly, we could build our narrative about this kind of heroes, so to say. Because basically it runs alongside this kind of famous words by Albert Camus, which I like very much. But under any circumstances, you have to solidarize with victims. not with those who was shooting, but those who were shot, so to say. And this, I believe, something, because exactly this may provide a new ground for a new European perspective.
Jaroslav wants to ban
very much so.
Yes, kind of dealing politically with history. And he referred to using heroes. But we in Germany, we have a certain culture of acknowledging fully, and I quoted Richard von Weizsäcker, acknowledging the defeat, addressing responsibility coming from this defeat, but with a certain problem seen over the last decades in regard to the Soviet Union, because there are many people, and you know them, you are working in Brandenburg, there's a very popular position saying, out of our guilt or responsibility towards the people of the Soviet Union, we cannot confront Russia now, because we are so guilty, in a way forgetting, ignoring the experiences of Belarus, of Ukraine, and all these places. Yesterday, some of us have been at the Karlshorst Museum for the German capitulation. And it was very interesting to discuss with Jörg Moré, the director of the Karlshorst Museum. He will attend the forum. Oh, it's already there. Oh, Jörg, hello, Mr. Moré. It was very interesting to discuss the challenges for this museum, how to transform in a very difficult political context. And it was a very interesting exchange. What is your observation in regard to, in the historical community, but also in the wider audience? Is it changing? Is the understanding changing? Or is this idea of the Soviet Union liberated Germany? Is it still kind of being conserved for this political reasons? Is it still kind of very dominant, this consciousness that we are liberated by the Soviet Union and by Russia and by Russians, and therefore we cannot confront Russia now?
Okay. Actually, I guess this is a connection I would also like to ban, as you said, because, I mean, the victory of the Soviet Union is a historical fact. So, we can interpret, discuss the history of the Second World War and how this victory was implemented, especially in Eastern Germany, and all the violence by the Red Army, and so we should never forget this. But no victory whatsoever allows a political power to start a new war. This is a connection I just cannot. I just cannot make. So no, it's so of course, and it brings us back to the politicization of historical memory. Of course, current politics use history to legitimize the war and to legitimize their own political movements. So. Yeah, and I know, of course, I know people who see and who stress and underline this connection and argue the way. I wouldn't argue the way and this way. So, yeah, and then from a historical point of view, of course, I mean, it would really sadden me if we eliminate the history of the Soviet Union from the history of the victory over Nazi Germany and only focus on the Western allies. So this is only half. This is only half of the entire history. We cannot leave it out. But we can just ask interesting questions, or questions that also, in regard to the glorification of the war history in Russia, are very uncomfortable. For instance, for Putin or for Russian historians. So it all depends on the questions we ask, I guess. So, and then what you just said about the connection between politicization and historiography and history, it will never end, I guess. I'm very pessimistic about this. I'm also very pessimistic about banning at all, anything.
One more aspect. 45 also marks the beginning of the legal reappraisal of Nazi crimes at the Nuremberg international processes. And there is some discussion going on about future legal proceedings in regard to Russia's war of aggression. Is this something, some aspects that can help in the current discussion, or is this out of discussion as the geopolitical situation is as you have described? Should we...
Before I proceed with this question, may I add some line what you say? I believe one of the tricky stuff is they're talking about the victims. The Red Army per se is a victim. If you see the number of the casualties among the soldiers, which are enormous. If you read the so-called memories, not the official memories, but the stories of the front, what is going in the front line, when the people were just sent in large numbers, so to say, for death, without counting with any kind of security, anything like that, mostly for propaganda, with all the kind of things. And this is, say, it's amazing because basically it's gives the idea of the Soviet state or the Russian state as the state which is a killer, which doesn't cares about human life, about human resources, so to say. And this is a many examples, so to say. And probably one of the best experiences I know, if this is if this is not translated in German, if not translated, has been translated. There's a beautiful, not beautiful, it's awful memories by Nikolai Nikulin, the historian from Hermitage in St. Petersburg, who was a soldier on the front. He tells in details what was really going on the front, so to say. And basically his message is that for such victory, you have to put on the trial for such a history. You have to be responsible for this because they're giving the size unprecedented, but any aims, not, so to say, word is lacking me, but they could be treated as a kind of the beautiful stories, so to say. And also what he's mentioned there, and it gives a lot of clue to what's going on in Russia. He says he wrote this in 1975, these memories, because what is this? He was 18, he was drafted to the front, right from the high school. And when there was 30 years celebration of the Soviet Union of the victory, he went to see the camp, the front that he was fighting for. And what he was shocked there, he saw many corpses, skeletons, which were still not buried. And on this aspect, he went home and started writing his memoirs on the war. And this is something very important. But what he says basically, that most of the stories, official stories that are provided in Soviet Union was written and told by the people who were not on the front line, who were on the rear. NKVD officers, commander was saying, and he says, this is the worst part because they are now monopolizing the history. And they tell how beautiful history was because they were saved. And he says, in 30 years, they will bring a new generation. You look forward, and it's exactly what Putin, because Putin has no experience of war, never. He's never been close to the front line nowadays. He's observing the war for a very safe place, and that will helps to celebrate it. So what I'm saying here, in this sense, you could also see army as a victim of the war, because basically they have this common experience nowadays. And still there's a following the Russian opposition newspaper, they tell this Islamic people just sending for definite death, without counting about any kind of casualties, without prepared to the kind of thing. So this is the story. So what was the question?
I like your point very much that you just made, and we can come to the Nuremberg process a bit later. I find it, yeah, which is often not known here is that the official commemoration practices in Soviet Union started in the 60s only. Yeah, so
65, I believe.
Yeah, 65. Yeah, so under Stalin and his successors, this was more kind of avoided topic, yeah, because of the war trauma.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it was, or you see differently.
We had some right at the beginning.
Take the microphone.
We had some celebrations on the first victory parade on the Red Square in Moscow, right in 45, I guess.
In 45.
And, yeah, and there were also almost no soldiers. People who never confronted really the front line, as you said. So it was a very official...
There's no other way to make this war beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. War isn't beautiful, not at all. So and then we had some, but then of course it disappeared. You're right, and then it came back. This huge, very stereotypical celebration during the Brezhnev era.
Yeah, but the real big celebration and commemorations with this parade started under Yeltsin in the mid of the 90s later, because before it was the 7th of November, yeah, the great October Revolution Day was the kind of main commemoration day, and May 9th was important but less important, and it started under Yeltsin with his search for a new Russian national identity to come back to the great victory. So it's from so-called Russia's democratic period under Yeltsin that this all thing started.
So basically, this is the story, and I now remember your question. Because basically the story is that Putin adores Stalin and hates Lenin. Because Stalin who made the empire, and Lenin who broke it, so to say. So this is the common message, so to say. And therefore, it's kind of replacement. They don't celebrate the Soviet 1917 revolution anymore. They celebrate a victory. Apart, there is another day which probably have to be mentioned. We have to do with the 20th century, that was 17th century. It's a day of celebration of Moscow against the Polish assault, which is also important because Poles are the West. There's constant, there are Poles, Napoleon, Hitler. This is the kind of the same story. They was coming to Moscow and they repeated by the popular uprising or the kind of thing. This is the message. So basically, they could not celebrate 1917 because 1917 has nothing that could unite Russians because it's red versus white, so to say. But the victory is something like really the central point. And here is the point, and here's because they connected in a way, because this is kind of Nuremberg process. There was a voices since the Gorbachev time, especially among the dissidents, including Russia dissidents. This must be kind of Nuremberg process against communism and communists. There were also some intellectuals in the West who was raised in this issue, but this was never heard and never treated seriously. And I believe this will have a kind of impact because it gives the idea about impunity. You could have a war, you could have anything, but you could barely be, so to say, uncovered. The thing is, I don't have recent statistics. I know statistics from a year ago or so. So number of the cases that Ukraine has now recorded as a case of the war crimes, this is several thousands, thousands. There's not any kind of trial who could proceed them. If you join the European Union and the European countries doing this kind, it's unbelievable. Physically, it's unbelievable, so to say. And secondly, therefore, we believe that this is kind of sign at the very beginning that probably Putin could be brought to the Hague for trial, which is also beyond our, unfortunate to say. So what I'm saying here, and this is something which Ukraine is already facing, there'll be a big problem because what Ukraine is nowadays, one of the main feelings that Ukraine has a justice, or many things, because they believe it's a just war. It's a just war. And a just war must kind of ends in a just way. But there's no way to end this war in a just way because we know what is coming, compromise, negotiations, so to say. So what to do with this? And therefore, we may see, how should I say, a new lines of the civil discontest, probably new lines of the civil conflicts, if I may say so, because the justice would not be met. because the expectations were so high. And reality would be much quite different. So in these circumstances, what we start immediately, who is to blame? And this would open the way for a political discussion, especially given the upcoming presidential elections, which is necessary to do, so to say. So to put it a different way, there is nothing more that we wish as a peace, but we also be very afraid of the peace. What waits Ukraine, because basically this issue are not resolved. Secondly, and this is something I have to say, which comes to this part of our discussion, German-Ukrainian Commission, Historical Commission, because we were thinking about this kind of the, what is the kind of called justice, reparative justice, transitional justice, because we're thinking how we could apply transitional justice in such a case, because it's exactly what Ukraine needs in such a circumstances is transitional justice. And what we found out, that European community, intellectual community, political community was very good in the developing the theoretical framework, but they never did in practice. They always failed. There's no experience of successful application of this kind of justice European country. So this I'm saying it's a big challenge. It's a big challenge, and not big challenge for it's a big challenge for Ukraine, but now it's also a big challenge for Europe, because how Europe would live in the post-war circumstances, what have could deal with Putin of the kind of milieu, because this is the issue which we have not to respond. So probably I believe this is something we have to discuss. Because again, from Ukrainian point of view, and I'm sorry to tell that Second World War is now, how to say, memory of Second World War, they're fading away. They're not of minor importance, they're still important, but people don't think about that much because of the local nowadays circumstances. But there are other issues that on the top. This is corruption, this is security, first of all, and justice. And this would be part of European integration of Ukraine, so to say, how it entered this. So what I'm saying here is there is something which I'm afraid. And I'm sorry to tell, in the presence of Walter and such a community of the Heinrich-Böll Foundation, are we not overestimating the importance of historical memory? Are we not diverting our focus of attention from the issues that are much more important to issue which is still important but less important? Does it have to do something with our profession? Because as people who live with humanities, we tend to pretend we're important. So we tend to think and talk about the thing that we used to, so to say, and therefore claiming this is it. I don't know, I have no answers. But I don't say we have just to reconsider historical memory in terms of what we content with historical memory. It's also how we should deal with historical memory, what role historical memory really plays in the society going through transformation, because in my understanding, again, sorry to take it too much, transformation is now a challenge not for Ukraine, but European Union as well. We are now on the biggest transformation probably ever emerged since the end of the Second World War.
Well, thank you so much. You don't have to be sorry for anybody, because it's exactly about the significance or loss of significance of memory politics under the current conditions. Yeah, this is our discussion here. So, and you are often saying that we turn to history from the present. Yeah, our questions change every day or every year, yeah, or whatever. So. Once more mentioning the Nuremberg processes, yeah, and the anniversary we have in September, October, I think. Yeah. What are the kind of questions you would pose to this anniversary to historians, yeah, from today?
Oh, okay. So maybe first of all, I can say I have a minute just to answer to what you just said. Or I totally agree with you. We are just living in such a huge time of transformation, rapid and radical transformation. And I even think that you already mentioned that the Zeitenwende word is too small to really understand what we are in now. So, because Zeitenwende is like a break, something ends and then it starts. A new epoch, a new period. And I would rather say that we know, we all feel that something came to an end, it ended, but we have no idea about the future, about the new. So we are in the midst of a transformation, and we are not seeing the end. So it's Zeitenwende is really too short, I guess, as a term to describe the period we live in. And I have also a question to you, Jaroslav, but maybe I answer this one first about Nuremberg. What I would like, yeah, I mean, I'm a historian who's very much interested in contradictions and surprises and paradoxical views on history. So what I would really like to research on the Nuremberg trial is how the Allies agreed on hot topics not to mention in Nuremberg. To be honest, this would be, I would really like to see the protocols, how they agreed on not to talk about the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, not to talk about the bombardments of the Western Allies in Germany. That's what I would really like to do. So, and then I dream of writing a book about, but I have no time, but maybe anybody wants to write a dissertation on it. So, on who chose the defenders of the Nazi perpetrators? Who defend? I mean, to defend such a perpetrator, a criminal in Nuremberg, must have been a very ambivalent task. So who did this? Who chose the people? Who paid them? Another, I guess, topic for an interesting book. So. Can I ask my question? Yeah, to Jaroslav. No, I mean, since I'm dealing so much, I mean, I'm a historian, I'm dealing with history, of course. So we all know this, this kind of interpretation of the West having betrayed the Poles in the Second World War, especially at the beginning of the Second World War, and when, despite the security agreements, which were very open, by Great Britain and France, there were no troops helping the Poles. And of course the Poles knew that nobody would help them, but that's a different question. So is there a similar discussion now in the Ukraine about probably, if we look at the history, the West will potentially lose the interest, and if anything happens, they will betray us, as we have this, and still in Poland, this discussion?
Thank you. It's a very important question. So far, it's not. I'm happy to tell that so far it's not, because the people still put that much hope, probably of desperate. Because there is another way for Ukraine to sustain, but to have some kind of help, and the war is still going on. So let's see, for the end of the war, we could just say whether there's betrayal or not, but there is an increasing skepticism. Increasing skepticism from the beginning of the war, first with the United States, with Biden, now with Trump. With Trump is probably more so pronounced, and also with the European Union, giving the Fico, giving the Hungary, the elections, what we have nowadays, all the kind of things, ADF, there's a lot of this kind of stuff. And there is a danger in that, without a doubt, because there is a new trend emerging, which has always been strong enough in Ukraine, but now it's getting some kind of impulse, getting some of strength, and this is that we should not rely to anybody but on our own forces. And it's very suicidal. It's growing. Because basically this is war of attrition, and the war of attrition boils down to resources. Ukraine has no chances to win the war, and if sustained, given the size of Russia and the source of the Russian resources, Ukraine could sustain only if you have access to the Western resources. And this is something which is kind of very, very suicidal. There is a growing sense that given this kind of skepticism, that we have to focus on ourselves. So this is it. But that said, there's another strategy, which is, by the way, suggested nowadays by Zaluzhny. You know, the Zaluzhny was a head of the army, and now is the most popularity. He's probably the, if there'll be elections, Zaluzhny wins like that with Zelensky. And now he's probably thinking about starting his career. And Zaluzhny suggests another suggestion here, that without that we couldn't lose the support of the West. We have to be, but therefore we have to build also on security for decades, probably more. What he's just suggesting, we have to follow the Israel part. We have to rebuild our society strategically. Every sector of our life, cultural, economics, political, has to be built on this kind of roles of the Israel, because we could not win the war. We know that Russia will be there, Putin will be there, Putin regime will be for the next several years and not for decades. And this is something as a kind of the, so to say, contra argument. We know what happened because it depends on the whether it has a political life or emerging in Ukraine, what kind of discourses this, but this are there. So what I'm saying, to put long story short, there is still not yet idea that West has betrayed or may betray it, but there is skepticism.
Well, Jaroslav, Hrytsak, Claudia, Weber, thank you so much for this first round of talks. I think it opened up a wide field of ideas, questions for the next 2 days to come. We will, after a short coffee break, then refocus a little bit geographically on the Western Balkans and on Belarus. Then with the second fishbowl discussion after the lunch break, discuss changing narratives over the last decades in countries of the former Soviet Union and in the Western Balkans and the South Caucasus. In the evening, we will have, and then we will have presentations of different innovative projects. I recommend you very much. We have extremely interesting approaches to history, to historical research and didactics to be shown. And in the evening, we will have a reading performance of Heinrich-Böll experiences during and after the war. So feel invited. This will be in a bit more informal way. And tomorrow then we split into 3 working groups. Those who have not registered yet for one of those groups, please do so if possible. And then last but not least, Klara Fristatska tomorrow will then moderate the 3rd fishbowl, which is dealing with extreme violence at the end of the war and the legal rebraces, the beginning of legal rebraces. So this is, in short, our agenda for the next 2 days to come. Thank you so much again for this beginning, and have a nice day.